Hello, my friends. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe.
I'd always loved national parks. The quiet, the way the trees towered overhead like sentinels, the air sharp and alive with the smell of pine and earth. So when my friends bailed on our summer camping trip, I decided I wouldn't let it go to waste. I packed my old tent, my gear, and a headlamp and drove to one of the more remote parks in the Rockies. I didn't want crowds, didn't want noise, just me, the wilderness, and maybe a good story to tell when I got back. The first day was perfect. I hiked a trail that led to a waterfall I'd seen in pictures. It roared louder than I expected, and the mist left my skin sticky. I snapped a few photos, laughed at how alone I felt, but how good it was. By the time I set up my tent at a secluded campsite near the trailhead, the sun was just slipping behind the jagged peaks. That's when I first noticed something off. It wasn't obvious. There was no shape lurking behind the trees, no sudden sound, just the feeling like I'd walked into a space that wasn't meant for me. My skin prickled, but I brushed it off as exhaustion. National parks can feel eerie when you're alone, I told myself. Night fell quickly. The temperature dropped, and I wrapped myself in my sleeping bag, listening to the night sounds. The wind rustling the branches, an owl somewhere far off, the occasional snap of a twig. Then I heard it, a whisper. At first, I thought I imagined it. I sat up, squinting into the blackness outside my tent, and heard it again. Hey. It was soft, almost hesitant. My heart raced. My first thought was another camper, maybe playing a prank. I zipped up the tent and called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" No answer. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself the wind was playing tricks with my mind. But then the whisper came again. This time, it wasn't one voice. It was many, overlapping, almost like the forest itself was trying to speak. I didn't sleep much that night. Every snap of a branch, every rustle of leaves sounded deliberate. By morning, I was jittery, but convinced I'd just been paranoid. I packed up, decided to hike deeper into the park. There was a trail that led to a high ridge, one I hadn't seen crowded with other hikers. It promised isolation, solitude, and maybe a better sense of why I'd come here. I shouldn't have gone. By midday, I was following a narrow, barely there path that twisted through dense pines. Sunlight flickered through the canopy, and for a moment, it felt peaceful. But the further I walked, the more the forest seemed to close in. I noticed the trees weren't just tall, they were old, gnarled, their bark twisted like something alive. And then I saw them, carvings. At first, I thought they were old trail markers, but no trail I knew used symbols like this. They weren't letters or numbers. They were shapes sharp, jagged, almost teeth-like, scratched deep into the wood. And they weren't random. They seemed to follow me, guiding me deeper. I stopped. "Okay, weird," I muttered. My instinct screamed to turn back, but something inside me wanted to see where they led. Hours passed. I kept seeing the carvings. At one point, I realized the forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just a suffocating stillness that made my ears ring. I could feel it then, a presence, not human, not animal, but aware of me, watching, waiting. I tried calling out, but my voice sounded wrong, swallowed by the trees. Panic started to claw at my chest. I turned to retrace my steps, but the path I thought I'd come from was gone. Completely gone. I was trapped in a maze of trees that all looked the same. That's when I heard it again. The whisper. Turn back. I froze. The voice was closer this time, unmistakably human, but distant, hollow. I spun around, heart hammering, but saw nothing. Just the trees, all identical, oppressive. I ran. Hours, or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell, passed as I stumbled blindly, my backpack scraping against branches, my breath coming in ragged gasps. And then I saw it, a figure. It wasn't fully formed, more like a shadow between the trees. It moved without sound, gliding toward me, impossibly fast. My instincts told me to run, but my legs refused. Something primal held me in place. "Don't move," it said. I did anyway, breaking into a sprint, only to trip and hit the ground hard. Pain shot through my leg. When I looked up, the shadow was gone. Only the carvings remained, darker now, what as if freshly made. Night was coming again. I knew I couldn't stay here. I had to find shelter. I stumbled across a clearing and found an abandoned ranger cabin. Its door hung open like a warning. Inside, dust and decay, the smell of rot heavy. That's when I saw them. Photos, hundreds of them, tacked haphazardly to the walls. Each one was of hikers, alone, smiling, taking pictures of themselves in the park. But the eyes were scratched out. Every single one. I gagged. On the floor, a journal. I opened it. The handwriting was erratic, frantic. They watch. They wait. They don't like being followed. They take those who stray too far. I'm next. Next. The words blurred as panic took hold. I needed to leave. I grabbed my pack, barely looking at the door before running into the night. The forest had changed. Shadows moved where there should be none, the trees bending slightly as if leaning toward me. The whispers returned, more insistent now. Stay, don't go, forever. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs screamed in agony. And then, suddenly, the forest opened. A familiar trail. The sunlight pierced through the trees. Relief hit me like a wave. I'd escaped. Or so I thought. When I reached my car at the trailhead, I noticed something impossible. The carvings. They were there, etched into the hood, deep, fresh, teeth-like. I didn't touch them. I drove, hands trembling on the wheel, never looking back. Back home, I try to rationalize it. Stress, exhaustion, maybe hallucinations from isolation. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the whispers. I see shadows at the corner of my vision. And sometimes I wake to find tiny scratches, jagged, on my walls, my furniture, my skin. I never went back to the park. I don't plan to. But the thing is, I know it's still there. Watching, waiting, and it's patient. I can't explain it. No one can. And I'm not sure I want them to. I've always thought of myself as someone who could handle the wilderness. Growing up in the Midwest, my dad would take me camping every summer, and I learned to respect the woods without fearing them. Or at least, that's what I thought. Last August, I decided to hike a trail in one of the most remote areas of Glacier National Park. I didn't want to go alone, but none of my friends were available, and there was something appealing about being utterly alone for a few days. I wanted solitude. I wanted peace. And I wanted a challenge. The first day went perfectly. I hiked the trail, set up my tent by a small creek, and watched the sunset paint the jagged peaks in golden red. I told myself this was exactly why I loved the parks. Untouched, wild, beautiful. But that night, I noticed something strange. I woke around 2 a.m. There was a light, dim, flickering, moving in the woods. My first thought was another camper, but the park was supposed to be empty in this area. Curiosity overpowered caution. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. The light seemed to dance just beyond the trees. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" Silence. I walked toward it, and the air grew colder. And then I saw the first sign that something was wrong. Footprints. They were too large to be mine, too deep to be from any animal I knew. They led into the forest, fading into shadows. Against my better judgment, I followed. Eventually, I emerged into a clearing I didn't recognize. In the center was a rock formation that looked deliberate, like a circle someone had arranged. And then I saw them. Figures. Not human, not quite. They were tall, thin, their limbs oddly elongated, and their skin almost reflective. They didn't move at first, just stood there, staring at me. One of them tilted its head, and I could swear it was smiling. I took a step back, and suddenly they were moving, slow, jerky, almost unnatural. I turned and ran. The forest seemed alive now, closing in around me. Every path I tried led me back to that same clearing. Always there, watching, waiting. I don't know how long I ran before I stumbled into a cave. Inside, the smell of earth and decay was heavy. I stayed there for hours, praying that whatever was out there couldn't find me. When morning came, the world outside looked wrong. Trees twisted at impossible angles, the trail completely vanished, and the mountains looked like they were pressing in on me. I ran downhill, hoping to find a road. Then I saw a figure in the distance. A woman standing by a tree. She waved. Relief flooded me. I ran toward her. "Please help me," I gasped. She turned. Her eyes were black, her mouth too wide, stretching unnaturally as she smiled. She just stared, and then more figures appeared behind her, dozens of them. One of them stepped forward, its elongated fingers curling. And then, to my horror, it whispered my name. I bolted. Trees seemed to shift, paths changed under my feet, and the shadows followed. I stumbled, fell into a river, and let the current carry me. Hours later, I washed up near the park boundary. The forest behind me was still, like nothing had happened. I thought I'd escaped, but that night, back in a motel, I couldn't sleep. Something kept scratching at the walls, and then I saw it in my reflection. A shadow, standing just behind me. Its shape was wrong, too tall, too thin. I spun, but the room was empty. While I looked back in a mirror, it was closer. I faced it. "You don't get me," I said, my voice shaking. "You can't have me." It tilted its head, and for a moment, I saw recognition in its eyes. Then it vanished. I left the country for a while, but it wasn't gone. I've seen shadows in my apartment, heard my name whispered in the wind. I survived because I refused to belong to it. I survived because I refused to be swallowed by that other world. And I know someday it will come back. But next time I'll be ready. Because in the end, that's the only way to survive the park. Not by running, not by hiding, but by facing it. I never believed in true horror stories about the national parks. I thought they were just exaggerations, tall tales told by rangers to scare kids or thrill seekers. Until last summer, when I went to hike one of the more isolated sections of Shenandoah National Park, I was confident I could handle anything. I was wrong. I arrived late in the afternoon, parking my car at a quiet trailhead near the ridge. The lot was empty except for one other vehicle, an old SUV with dust streaking its windows. I noticed it because the driver's side door was wide open, swinging slightly in the wind. I thought about mentioning it to the ranger station, but the place was a half-hour drive back, and I told myself someone would come back for it. I should have checked. The trail was beautiful at first. Sunlight slanted through the trees, painting the moss-covered trunks gold. Birds darted across my path, and a cool breeze rustled the leaves. I kept thinking about how lucky I was to have the forest mostly to myself. By mid-afternoon, I'd left the main trail and started a smaller path I'd read about online, a loop that led to a rocky outcrop with supposedly incredible views. The further I went, the quieter the forest became. Not the peaceful quiet of nature, but a heavy, oppressive silence. It was as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. That's when I noticed the first oddity. A tree had fallen across the path, but it wasn't natural. The trunk was twisted unnaturally, the branches bent back toward the earth as if pressed into a deliberate shape. I stepped around it and realized the ground nearby was covered in small stones, arranged in a circle. In the middle, there was a crude carving in the dirt, like letters or maybe symbols, though I couldn't read them. I laughed nervously. Probably some kids messing around, I told myself. But then the feeling came, an unmistakable, prickling awareness that I was not alone. I glanced around. No one, not even birds, not even squirrels. Just the trees, silent, unmoving. I kept walking. Hours passed. The trail narrowed, the undergrowth thickening until I was practically pushing branches aside. The sunlight faded faster than it should have, and shadows stretched long and sharp, though the sun hadn't moved that much. I realized I didn't recognize anything anymore. No ridge, no creek, no marker. The trail seemed to twist back on itself, as if the forest had swallowed me and reshaped around me. I stopped. My stomach knotted. I realized I hadn't heard a single animal for over an hour. Not a bird, not a bug. Nothing. Only me. Then I saw it. Footprints. Bare, human-sized, pressed deep into the dirt, leading off the path into the trees. I thought about turning back, but instinctively I felt drawn toward them. I shouldn't have gone. The footprints led me to a clearing I didn't recognize. A small pond lay in the center, dark and still. Around it, the trees were wrong. The bark was blackened, twisted, as if burned, though there was no sign of fire. And the reflection in the pond, it didn't match reality. I crouched, peering at the water. The surface rippled even though there was no wind. And then I saw them, faces, hundreds of them. Pressed against the surface like the pond was a thin sheet covering another world. Distorted, screaming, their mouths open wide. I stumbled back, heart hammering. Something moved behind me. I spun. A man, or what looked like a man, stood at the edge of the clearing. His clothes were tattered, his face pale, almost translucent. He didn't move like a normal person. He slid across the ground in small jerks, like a puppet with missing strings. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low, gravelly, almost gurgling. I don't know what this is," I stammered. He tilted his head and gestured toward the pond. "It shows everything. Everything the forest takes, everything it hides." I tried to run. My legs refused to obey fully. The undergrowth seemed to clutch at my ankles, roots twisting like hands. The man, or whatever he was, started moving closer, jerking inhumanly. I scrambled backward and tripped into the pond. Cold water, surged over me. I surfaced, coughing, sputtering, and realized the pond was deeper than it looked. Much deeper. I kicked to the shore on the opposite side and ran, dripping wet, lungs burning. The forest changed again. Shadows seemed to fold into themselves, branches reaching farther than they should. Then I saw them, dozens of people, pale and silent, standing between the trees. Their eyes were empty, their faces drawn tight. They didn't move like normal humans. They moved like reflections slipping through the cracks of the world. I ran blindly. Every direction seemed wrong. Every path looped back to the pond. I thought I was going insane. And then I remembered the SUV I saw that morning. Maybe there was a road nearby. I pushed through the underbrush, praying, screaming inside my mind for something familiar. At last, I stumbled into a clearing that felt right. The road. My car. Empty. I slammed the door and locked it, shaking so hard I couldn't start the engine at first. Then I saw something moving along the edge of the tree lane. A figure, thin, too long-limbed, gliding just above the ground. I floored it. I didn't stop until I hit the ranger station, breathless, soaked, terrified. The ranger looked at me like I'd lost my mind. I told her what I saw. She nodded slowly. "You're not the first," she said quietly. "People go missing out there every year. We tell stories to keep hikers on the main trails, but some things are older than the park. Some things watch. Some things collect." I left the park that day. I never looked back. I thought I'd escaped. I thought I'd put the forest behind me. But that night, back in my apartment, I noticed something impossible. The pond. It wasn't in my dreams. It was in my reflection. Every time I looked in a mirror, the surface rippled slightly, and I could see the faces pressed against it, waiting, screaming, watching. I thought maybe I could ignore it. Maybe it was just a hallucination, a memory. But it followed me. And then, weeks later, I found footprints in my apartment. Not small ones. Big, human-sized, pressed deep into the carpet, leading from the bedroom to the living room and stopping at the mirror. I realized the forest hadn't let me go. I didn't escape. I was marked. I've tried to leave mirrors covered, tried to avoid windows, tried to sleep with lights on. But last night, I woke and saw a handprint in the steam on the bathroom mirror. Just one hand, long fingers, pressed flat, waiting for me to see it. I don't know what the forest wants or why it let me walk away. Maybe it was curious. Maybe it wanted me scared. I don't know. All I know is I can't stay anywhere too long. It follows. It watches. And one day, I know I won't be able to leave. Because sometimes the national parks aren't safe. Sometimes the wilderness isn't just wild, it's alive. And it remembers you. I never thought much about the warnings posted at the trailhead. Stay on marked trails. Do not enter uncharted areas. Hikers are responsible for their own safety. Typical national park boilerplate. I ignored them, like everyone else does. I told myself I knew the woods, that I could handle myself. I was wrong. It started on the first day. I parked at a small trailhead in the backcountry of Great Smoky Mountains National Park, a place I'd never been. My plan was simple. Hike to an overlook, camp near the ridge, and spend the night alone under the stars. The air smelled like damp earth and pine, the way it always does in early September. Perfect. I followed the trail for a few hours, the sun slanting low through the trees. The trail was narrow, barely maintained, with roots and rocks that threatened to trip me at every step. I didn't mind. I loved the challenge, the solitude. But soon, I noticed something strange. The trail signs were wrong. or missing. I stopped to check my map. According to the markers, I should have been halfway to the ridge, but all I saw were trees. Endless trees, twisting in ways that didn't seem natural. The sun had dropped lower, and shadows stretched like fingers. I felt my stomach tighten. I shrugged it off and kept walking. I thought maybe I had misread the trailhead directions. That happens to anyone, right? Hours later, I found myself in a clearing I didn't recognize. A small pond reflected the darkening sky, and for a moment, I felt relief. Water meant life. Maybe the ridge was near. I knelt to drink, but something in the reflection caught my eye. It wasn't me. The pond showed my reflection, yes, but behind me, there was another figure. A man, tall, thin, his features obscured by shadow. I spun around. Nothing. The clearing was empty except for the trees and the pond. I laughed nervously, telling myself it was a trick of the light. But when I looked back at the water, the figure was closer. I swear it smiled. Panic clawed at me. I grabbed my pack and ran, taking no care where I stepped. The trees grew tighter, their branches snagging my clothes and hair. I stumbled over roots and rocks, and the forest seemed to rearrange itself around me. I thought I knew the trail, but every turn led me back to the same clearing. The pond, the reflection. I called out, my voice echoing strangely, like the forest itself was swallowing my words. The tall figure appeared again, now standing at the edge of the pond. It didn't move toward me, but it didn't need to. Its presence was enough. I ran again blindly. My legs burned, my lungs ached. Then I noticed footprints in the mud. Not mine, larger, deeper, human-like, but wrong somehow, as if the person who made them had walked on tiptoe. Yet each print was impossibly heavy. They led toward the trees, toward the pond. I wanted to scream, but my throat had gone dry. Night fell quickly. I was lost. I couldn't find a suitable place to camp, so I stumbled into a narrow ravine, hoping it would offer some shelter. The air was thick now, heavier than it should be. The forest was quiet, no rustling, no wind, no animals. It was a suffocating silence, one that pressed against my skull and made my thoughts fray. That's when I saw the first set of eyes. Two small, yellow dots hovering in the darkness. I froze. Then another pair appeared, and another, until I counted at least a dozen, all around me, staring from the blackness. They didn't blink. They didn't move, but I knew they were alive, waiting. I ran again, scrambling up a steep slope until I reached a cliffside overlooking a valley. I realized I had no idea which way was the trailhead. And then I saw it, a light, a flashlight, moving slowly along the trail below. Relief surged. I shouted, waved my arms. Someone was coming. Someone could save me. The light stopped. Then it came closer, not along the trail, but straight toward me, climbing the cliff with impossible speed. I noticed it then, no beam, just a pale glow surrounding the figure. Human-shaped, yes, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, and it smiled. I backed away from the cliff's edge, heart hammering. My legs gave out, and I fell. For a split second, I saw the valley rushing up to meet me. Then I hit the ground hard, pain shooting through my shoulder, but I didn't tumble off the cliff. Instead, I landed in a patch of mossy earth, the figure nowhere in sight. Shaking, bleeding, and terrified, I crawled back to the cliff edge. The forest was silent again, eerily still. The pond I had passed earlier glimmered far below, reflecting the moonlight, but there was no sign of anyone else. Morning came. I wandered downhill, disoriented, exhausted. By mid-afternoon, I stumbled onto a ranger-maintained trail. A hiker passing by stopped to help me, offering water and a cell phone. I called the park rangers. They arrived within an hour, looking grim. "You're lucky to be alive," one of them said. "People get lost out there all the time, but something else sometimes gets them." He added, "You weren't following the marked trails. And that pond you mentioned, it doesn't exist on any official map. Hikers have described it before, but no one's ever found it. You're not the first to see things out there." I left the park the next day, vowing never to return. For months, I tried to forget. I told friends it was a hallucination, dehydration, stress. But last week, I received a postcard in the mail. No return address. The image was a photograph of the pond, the same pond I had stumbled upon, black and still under the moonlight. And scrawled on the back, in neat, careful handwriting, "Next time, stay on the trail." I realized then that whatever I had seen wasn't done with me. The forest doesn't care about maps, trails, or warnings. And sometimes it watches longer than you think. I still dream of the pond, and in those dreams, the figure waits at the water's edge, smiling, patient. Because the forest, I've learned, never forgets. I've always been drawn to the national parks. There's something intoxicating about the mountains, the forest, the idea that you can stand somewhere that feels older than time itself. That's why last summer, I decided to hike alone in a remote section of Olympic National Park. I told my friends I wanted solitude, adventure, clarity. I wasn't prepared for what I found. The first day was perfect. The trail wound along the edge of a ridge, the kind of place where you feel on top of the world. The sky was a perfect blue, the air crisp and cold. I took pictures, stopped to breathe, felt the familiar peace that only comes when you're miles from the nearest road. By mid-afternoon, I came across a side trail that wasn't on my map. It looked old, barely maintained, but something about it drew me in. I told myself it was the adventure I was looking for. I ignored the small voice in my head telling me not to go. The path narrowed quickly, twisting between gnarled trees, their trunks twisted like they were reaching for something. The farther I walked, the quieter it got. Not the quiet of a forest, where birds and insects hum and the wind rustles leaves, but a heavy, unnatural silence. I couldn't hear my own footsteps. Even the sound of my breath seemed swallowed by the trees. After about an hour, I came to a clearing. In the center was a small, black pond, perfectly still. I knelt to look at my reflection, and for a moment I felt a flicker of relief. Then I realized the reflection wasn't mine. The face staring back was mine, yes, but twisted. The eyes were darker, sunken, hollow, and its mouth was stretched into a silent scream. I jumped back. My heart hammered. I told myself it was a trick of the shadows, or the water. I had to keep moving. I stood up and turned to retrace my steps, but the trail was gone. The forest had shifted, or maybe I had wandered too far. I didn't know which direction led back to safety. That's when I heard the first sound. A whisper. "Leave." It was soft, almost hesitant. I spun around. The trees were motionless. The pond shimmered in the fading light. I tried to tell myself it was the wind, but the voice came again, more insistent. "Leave now." Panic surged. I ran, blindly, crashing through the undergrowth. Every direction looked the same. The sun was dipping below the horizon, and darkness crept fast. I could feel it then, eyes on me, dozens of them somewhere beyond the trees. I didn't stop to look. I just ran. I tripped over roots, tore my clothing on branches, and fell to the ground. When I looked up, I froze. The pond was in front of me again. How was that possible? I had not moved in that direction. Something about the water was wrong. It seemed to pulse, dark ripples forming shapes like faces pressed against the surface, screaming silently. Then I noticed a figure standing at the edge of the pond. Tall, thin, impossibly still. Its skin was pale, almost reflective in the moonlight. It didn't walk toward me. It didn't need to. Its presence alone was enough to freeze my blood. "Why are you here?" it asked. The voice was hollow, echoing in my skull rather than in the air. I'm just hiking," I stammered, trying to sound braver than I felt. I'll leave." The figure tilted its head, watching. Then it disappeared. The forest seemed to exhale. I ran again, the underbrush snagging at me, until I stumbled over something hard. I fell into a shallow depression, scraping my hands and knees, and that's when I saw them. Hundreds of footprints pressed into the earth, circling the pond, all leading to it, but none leaving. The weight of realization hit me. These weren't animal tracks. They were older and possible. Whoever or whatever had made them had been here for decades, maybe centuries, and they never left. I climbed out of the depression, shaking. My legs were numb. I needed to escape. I ran blindly, relying on memory and instinct. Hours passed. Trees blurred together. The sky darkened fully, stars peeking through the canopy. I stumbled onto what looked like a worn path, and my heart lifted. I thought I had found the main trail. Then I saw the cabin. It was old, abandoned, nestled between trees with the door hanging crooked. I approached cautiously. Inside, the smell of rot and mildew hit me. Dust covered the floor. On the walls were photographs, hundreds of them. People all alone in the park, smiling, posing, looking normal. Until you noticed the eyes. Every single one had been scratched out. I gagged. I turned to leave. That's when I heard movement behind me. Something soft, deliberate, almost liquid. I spun, but the cabin was empty. The door slammed shut. I tried to open it, but it was stuck. Then I realized the windows, they didn't show the forest outside. They showed the pond. The water was still, reflecting moonlight, and I could see the tall figure standing there, waiting. I ran to the back door. The forest outside had changed. The trees were closer, twisted, leaning toward me. I had no choice but to climb out a broken window. My hands bled on the glass. I fell into the underbrush, got up, and ran. I don't know how long I ran. Hours? Days? Time lost all meaning. My food and water were gone. My phone had no signal. Everything in the forest was wrong. Paths looped impossibly. Shadows moved independently. The air thickened as if it were alive. Eventually, I reached a ridge I recognized. I stumbled to the main trail and found a family hiking toward their car. Relief overwhelmed me. I told them what had happened in fragments, breathless. They called the rangers. I gave my name, my description, and told them about the pond, the footprints, the cabin. The rangers looked at me with a strange mix of concern and disbelief. "Well, check it out," one said. "But that area is protected and hasn't had a maintained trail in decades. People say things out there, strange things. You might have seen one of those." I wanted to laugh. wanted to say I knew what I saw was real. But the rational part of me clung to hope. Maybe it had been a hallucination. Maybe I had wandered off the trail too long. I left the park the next morning, vowing never to return. Months passed. I tried to put it behind me. Work, friends, life, all distractions. But the dreams began. At first, subtle, shadows moving at the edge of vision. Then more vivid, the pond, black and still, the pale figure standing at its edge, waiting. And last week, I received a package in my apartment. No return address. Inside was a single photograph, the pond, illuminated by moonlight, with footprints circling it. In the reflection, I saw myself, my face twisted, screaming silently. I can't go back to the mountains. I can't stay here. Wherever I am, I feel its eyes on me, watching, waiting. But here's the difference this time. I've learned something the forest didn't expect. I don't need to run anymore. I don't need to hide, because the forest isn't endless. The forest can't follow me everywhere, and when it comes for me again, I'll be ready. I thought I knew what it meant to be alone in the wilderness. I'd camped and hiked all over the country, from the Rockies to the Smokies, and the solitude of the mountains had always felt like freedom. That is, until last summer when I decided to take a solo hike in a remote section of Yellowstone National Park. The trailhead was quiet, barely marked. I parked my old Jeep at the edge of the lot, double-checked my gear, and started up the narrow path that wound into the forest. The first few hours were perfect. Sunlight slanted through the towering pines. A crisp breeze carried the scent of wet earth, and I felt, as I always did in the backcountry, utterly alive. By mid-afternoon, I reached a fork in the trail. One path continued along the ridge. The other led steeply downhill into a valley I didn't recognize. There was no marker, no trail map showing it, but something about the descent intrigued me. I shrugged and started down. The forest changed almost immediately. The trees were older, twisted, their bark rough and blackened in patches that looked like old scars. Moss hung thick from branches, damp and heavy. The air grew colder, even though the sun still shone. And the further I went, the quieter it became. Not peaceful quiet, but the kind of silence that presses in and makes every movement feel wrong. Then I saw the footprints. At first, I thought they were human, bare deep in the soft earth, leading off the path into the thick trees. But they weren't like normal tracks. They were too long, too narrow, and they seemed to sink into the ground in an unnatural way. I should have turned back, but curiosity kept me moving forward. The valley opened into a small clearing with a stream, but the water was black, like oil, reflecting no light. I knelt at the edge to look closer and froze. My reflection was wrong. My face stared back, pale and hollow-eyed, and behind me, I saw movement. Not my shadow, not a reflection, but something on a bank. A figure tall and thin, with long, spindly arms that reached toward the sky. Its head tilted unnaturally, and though its face was obscured by shadow, I could feel its gaze. I stumbled back, tripping over roots, and the figure didn't move, but the air around it seemed to vibrate. I ran. The forest itself seemed to twist and shift as I ran. The trail I thought I was following disappeared. Every tree looked the same. Every turn brought me back to the black stream, and the figure was always there, standing at the edge, waiting. I screamed, but the sound went nowhere. It didn't carry, didn't echo. It simply vanished. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed. Darkness fell faster than it should have. I tried to climb a ridge to get my bearings. but the slope was slippery, covered in moss and loose stones. I slipped, hitting my shoulder, and rolled to a stop in a shallow depression. The forest above me seemed impossibly tall, the trees pressing together as if to trap me. That's when I noticed the eyes. Not one, not two, but dozens of tiny points of yellow, glowing faintly from the shadows. They were everywhere, just beyond the edge of the trees, blinking and watching. I tried to move, but my legs refused. My mind raced. Predators? Bears? Wolves? None of it made sense, because these weren't animals. They were too still, too intelligent. I scrambled to my feet and ran blindly, following what I thought was a downhill path. I stumbled onto a clearing that shouldn't have existed, a ruined cabin, half swallowed by the forest. Its roof had caved in, walls rotted, but inside I saw something impossible. Hundreds of photographs tacked to the walls. Hikers, campers, families, all smiling, all alone. But every face had been altered. Eyes blacked out, mouths scratched away. Some faces were unrecognizable, warped into expressions of silent terror. A low hum filled the air. I spun around. The cabin was empty. Then I realized the photographs were moving. Faces twisted, turning to watch me. I stumbled back, tripping, and the door slammed shut. I was trapped. Panic clawed at me. I pounded on the door. I screamed. And then, from the shadows, a voice, human but distorted, low and gravelly. "You shouldn't have come here." I backed into a corner, trying to find an escape. The cabin itself seemed to breathe, walls pulsing like a heartbeat. And then I saw it, the tall figure stepping through the door. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, like it wasn't bound by normal motion. "You belong to the forest now," it said. I bolted toward a broken window, shards cutting my hands, and tumbled outside into the night. The forest was different, darker, alive in a way I had never imagined. Trees leaned toward me, roots twisting like hands, branches snagging my clothes. I ran until my lungs burned, until I collapsed on the main trail far below the ridge. I flagged down a park ranger who happened to pass. They called for backup, but I couldn't explain it all. The pond, the figure, the photographs. They told me I was lucky to have found the main trail. Other hikers had gone missing in that area before, but no one could explain why. I left the park the next day, shaken but relieved. I tried to rationalize it. Exhaustion, hallucination, stress. I returned home and avoided forests entirely. Then, a month later, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. The ruined cabin, the photographs on the walls, and in the corner, a new face. My face, smiling. I realized the truth. The forest didn't want to kill me. It wanted to mark me. And now, part of it was with me, no matter where I went. I've moved across the country, far from mountains, far from forests, but I still see shadows at the edge of my vision. Sometimes late at night, I catch glimpses of my own reflection in windows or mirrors, and it doesn't look quite right. The eyes are darker, the mouth twisted in a way I don't recognize. I survived the forest, but I didn't escape it, and I know one day it will call me back, not to kill me, but to make me one of its own. Until then, I walk the world as a warning. The forest remembers. It never forgets. And if you stray from the trail, it may notice you too. I thought I was prepared for the wilderness. I'd hiked alone before, camped in places where cell service didn't exist, and I prided myself on knowing how to read a map, pitch a tent, and stay calm when things got rough. But nothing had prepared me for the week I spent in the remote northern section of Glacier National Park. I arrived early on a Monday morning, backpack loaded, car parked at a quiet trailhead that seemed more like a forgotten clearing than an official parking lot. The trail looked promising at first, well-trodden, with occasional markers painted on the trees. The air was crisp, the sky clear, and I felt that familiar thrill of being truly alone. I followed the trail for hours, passing streams and moss-covered boulders, climbing higher into the mountains. Around midday, I came across a narrow side trail that wasn't on my map. It plunged steeply into a dense part of the forest, dark even under the midday sun. There was no marker, no indication of where it went, but I felt drawn to it. I told myself it would shorten my route to the ridge. I should have stayed on the main trail. The path quickly became overgrown. Tree roots twisted like snakes across the narrow trail, and the underbrush tugged at my legs. The air grew colder and heavier, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones, the kind that makes your skin crawl. Every few minutes I thought I saw movement in the trees, but every time I looked, nothing was there. I came to a clearing and saw a pond, small, black, and unnaturally still. I knelt to drink, and that's when I first noticed something wrong. My reflection didn't move when I did. At first, I thought it was the water being still, but then I realized the face in the reflection was smiling. And I wasn't. I stumbled back, tripping over a root. The air grew heavier. The forest went completely silent. Not just quiet, but unnervingly silent. I couldn't hear birds, or the wind, or even my own footsteps. And then I heard it, a whisper barely audible, yet unmistakably human. Turn back. I froze. My first thought was another hiker, but the whisper was all around me. It didn't come from any one direction. I tried to call out, but my voice felt swallowed by the trees. My heart raced. I ran, stumbling through the undergrowth. Every turn I took brought me back to the pond. Every time I thought I had escaped, the water was there again, black and still, the reflection smiling. That's when I saw them. Figures, dozens of them, emerging slowly from the trees. At first, I thought they were hikers like me, lost perhaps, but the closer I looked, the more wrong they were. Their limbs were too long, their movements jerky, unnatural, like puppets with broken strings. Their faces were pale, stretched, and their eyes were empty holes that seemed to look right through me. I turned and ran again, desperation fueling my legs. The forest seemed to close in, paths twisting and folding back on themselves. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed. Time felt meaningless. I stumbled across a rocky outcrop and hid behind a boulder, tried to catch my breath. That's when I noticed carvings in the rock. Sharp, jagged symbols, almost like teeth. They weren't letters, not numbers, something older, something I didn't recognize. I realized then the truth. Whatever these things were, they didn't just live here. They controlled this place. The forest itself was alive with them, and it wanted me. I ran again, blindly, until I reached a ravine. Darkness was falling, and I had no idea where I was. I tried to climb, but the rocks were slick, and I fell into a shallow depression. My leg was cut, my hands bloody, my mind frantic. That's when I saw the pond again, just below the ridge. Only this time, it wasn't still. The water churned, and hundreds of faces pressed against the surface, mouths open in silent screams. And then I saw it, the tallest of them, the figure that had been watching me all day. It stepped from the edge of the pond, its head tilting unnaturally, long fingers brushing the water. It looked at me, and I felt my mind crawl with fear. "You shouldn't be here," it said, voice hollow, almost inside my skull. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move fast enough. It advanced, gliding silently over the ground. And then I remembered something my father once told me about the wilderness. Fear gives life to what hunts you. I forced myself to calm my breathing, to think. I realized I had to stop running. Running had only brought me in circles. I turned to face the figure, heart hammering, and said the only thing I could think of: "I belong here as much as you do. You can't take me, not without a fight." It stopped, its head tilted further, and for a moment I thought I saw something like curiosity in the emptiness where its eyes should have been. Then the other figures hesitated, stopping at the tree line. I kept my gaze steady. The pond stilled again. The faces beneath the surface disappeared. Slowly, the forest seemed to relax, as if holding its breath for the first time in hours. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I walked slowly, steadily, keeping my eyes on the tallest figure. Step by step, I retraced my path back toward the main trail. Every movement I made was deliberate, confident, unwilling to let fear control me. When I finally emerged onto the familiar path, the sunlight was gone, replaced by the long shadows of evening. I never looked back. I made it to my car, drove out of the park, and didn't stop until I was hundreds of miles away. I never spoke to anyone about the pond, the faces, or the figures. Most people would have called me crazy. Maybe I was. But I did something no one else could. I walked through the forest and faced it, and it let me go. I still dream of the pond sometimes, the black water and the countless faces pressed against the surface. But now, when I do, I don't run. I walk steadily, knowing that the forest watches, yes, but that I am no longer prey. I survived Yellowstone, and for the first time, I think I understand that some horrors are not meant to kill you. They're meant to test you, to see if you can endure. And some of us survive by standing our ground. I never thought a national park could feel alive. Not in the way that matters. I'd hiked, camped, and backpacked alone in forests before, but what I experienced last summer in North Cascades National Park changed how I see wilderness forever. I started early, parking at a small trailhead near Ross Lake. The area was quiet, almost unnaturally so. Birds chirped in the distance, but the closer I got to the trail, the more isolated it felt. I packed light, tent, water, food for 3 days, but I had a gut feeling that I wouldn't need much of it. The first day was serene. The trail wound along ridges with distant snow-capped peaks, streams glimmering like glass, mossy rocks scattered like nature's ornaments. I set up camp near a creek, the air smelling of damp earth and pine. I fell asleep that night, thinking I was completely alone, but the forest has a way of letting you know you're never truly alone. I woke before dawn to the sound of a snapping branch. Not a normal forest sound, but deliberate, sharp. My flashlight revealed nothing. I shrugged, blaming a deer, and crawled back into my sleeping bag. By late morning, I decided to push further along an unmarked side trail I had seen on a small hand-drawn map in a ranger's pamphlet. It was steep and narrow, disappearing into thick trees that blocked the sun. The path twisted unnaturally, rising and falling like the forest had been carved to confuse me. I chalked it up to natural erosion, but the deeper I went, the more I felt eyes on me. I stopped at a small clearing and noticed something I couldn't explain. Stones. Hundreds of stones, arranged in concentric circles around a small depression in the earth. In the center lay a blackened piece of wood, charred as if it had been burnt, but strangely intact. I felt a chill run down my spine. I bent closer. The ground inside the circle seemed off. The dirt was darker, softer, almost like it was absorbing light. I reached out a hand and touched it. The second my fingers pressed the soil, I felt a tremor under my palm, a vibration that ran up my arm. I pulled back sharply, my heart racing. Something was here, waiting. I told myself to move on, to keep hiking, but the trail behind me had disappeared. The trees were thicker, the underbrush impassable in ways it hadn't been moments ago. Shadows twisted between the trunks. The wind carried whispers, soft and unintelligible, but unmistakably human. I ran. Hours passed. I had no idea where I was. The sky darkened unnaturally fast, and I realized I hadn't heard birds or insects in ages. The forest had fallen completely silent, except for the sound of my own frantic breathing. Then I saw movement in the corner of my eye, figures among the trees. They weren't human, at least not quite. Tall, thin, with elongated limbs, they moved jerkily, as if animated by some other will. Their skin was pale, reflective, almost wet in the dim light. They didn't approach directly, but always stayed just out of reach, watching, waiting. I stumbled into a second clearing and nearly fell over another pond, still and black. Its surface mirrored the sky, but the reflection was wrong. I could see the figures around me reflected in the water, though they were nowhere nearby. Their faces twisted in smiles I couldn't comprehend, empty, gaping, impossible. I didn't stop to examine it. I ran again, but every direction looked the same. I kept coming back to that pond. The trees around it were gnarled, leaning inward as if to trap me. I tried calling for help, but my voice vanished before it left my lips. At some point, I realized I wasn't alone in a forest. I was inside something older, something alive, something that had been here long before the park had trails or rangers. I didn't just feel watched, I felt studied, examined like an insect trapped under a jar. I tripped over roots and landed on my hands in the dirt, scraping them badly. When I looked up, I saw them, all of them. The tall figures surrounding the pond, watching, waiting. Then the tallest one stepped forward. Its head tilted in a way that made my stomach churn. It raised a hand, impossibly long fingers stretching toward the water, and whispered my name. I froze. No, not froze. Something inside me did. A primal recognition that this wasn't just a forest, wasn't just a place. It was a predator. Then the strangest thing happened. It stopped. The others followed its lead. They didn't advance. They didn't vanish. They simply waited. And in that moment, I realized that the only thing keeping me alive wasn't running. It was acknowledging them. I swallowed hard and spoke. I see you. The figure tilted its head further. I felt the air shift. It was testing me, yes, but I didn't flinch. I belong here as much as you do, I said. I'm just passing through. The pond stilled. The whispers stopped. The forest exhaled as if releasing a held breath for the first time in centuries. I kept walking, slowly, deliberately, back toward the main trail. Every step counted. Every heartbeat was proof that I was alive and present. When I finally emerged onto the marked trail hours later, the sun was low in the sky. I didn't look back. The forest behind me had returned to its normal quiet, as if nothing had happened. I reached my car just before dark, shaking, exhausted, and drove away, not stopping until I was out of the park entirely. I tried to rationalize it afterward. Exhaustion, hallucination, stress. But I knew the truth. The forest was alive in ways I couldn't explain. It could sense fear. It could bend space, manipulate paths, test its prey. And somehow, I had survived not by running, but by acknowledging it, by not giving it the power of my panic. I've returned to civilization, to city streets and crowded sidewalks, and yet I still dream of that pond. Sometimes at night, I wake and see ripples across the surface in my bedroom floorboards. But I'm not afraid anymore, because I know the difference between the forest as it hunts and the forest as it studies. And if I ever return, I'll walk slowly, deliberately, unafraid, because that is the only way to survive its attention. The national parks aren't just wilderness. They are older, stranger, and far more alive than we will ever understand. And someday, they will test you. When they do, the way you react will decide if you walk away or if you never leave at all. I always thought I could handle the backcountry. I've been hiking alone for years, sleeping in tents under open skies, carrying nothing but a backpack and confidence. That confidence lasted until last summer, when I decided to explore a remote section of Yosemite National Park I'd read about online, an unmarked loop far from the main trails. The morning started perfectly. The sun slanted through the pines, birds chirped, and the smell of damp earth and wildflowers filled the air. I felt alive in a way only the wilderness can make you feel. The trail was narrow but clear at first, winding around granite boulders and along the edge of a creek. I paused occasionally to take photos, to breathe in the world, and to tell myself that this was what it meant to be free. By mid-afternoon, I came across a fork in the path. One trail climbed toward a ridge. The other descended steeply into a thick forest. There was no marker, nothing to tell me where it led, but I chose the descent. Something about the shadows pulling me downward felt magnetic. Almost immediately, I realized I had made a mistake. The forest thickened unnaturally. The trees were older, their bark blackened and twisted, like they had been warped by some terrible fire long ago. The underbrush clawed at my legs as I moved, and the sunlight barely reached the forest floor. I began to notice that the usual noises of a forest, birds, insects, wind through leaves, had vanished. It was too quiet. That's when I saw the first footprints. They were large, human-shaped, and pressed deep into the soil. But something was wrong. The prints were too long, too narrow, and every set led in the same direction, toward the heart of the forest, and none led out. My stomach churned. I debated turning back, but the path behind me seemed to vanish into dense thickets I couldn't penetrate. I kept moving forward, heart hammering. Eventually, I stumbled into a small clearing. In its center was a pond, black as obsidian, perfectly still. I knelt to take a drink, but as I looked into the water, I froze. My reflection didn't move. My lips didn't align when I whispered my own name. And behind me, I saw shapes in the water, dozens of faces pressed against the surface, distorted in silent screams. I spun around. The clearing was empty. The forest stood still, silent, watching. Panic surged. I ran. The forest didn't help me. Every path I tried twisted back toward the pond. Every landmark I thought I recognized vanished. It was as if the forest itself had rearranged to keep me inside. Shadows moved unnaturally, and I thought I saw figures between the trees. Tall, thin, humanoid shapes with elongated limbs, faces pale and expressionless. They didn't run toward me, but I knew they were watching. I stumbled into another clearing, and there was again the pond, only larger, surrounded by rocks carved with symbols I didn't recognize. They were jagged, uneven, like claws scraping into the stone. The black water rippled slightly, though no wind blew. And I knew the figures were just beyond the edge, waiting. I wanted to scream, but my throat had gone dry. My mind raced for a plan, a way out, anything. Then I remembered an old hiking rule my father used to say: fear is the forest's leash. The more afraid you are, the tighter it holds you. I forced myself to stop. Breathe. Look. I spoke aloud. I see you. I'm here, and I am not afraid. The figures froze. The ripples in the pond stilled. The air itself seemed to pause. One of the figures stepped closer, tilting its head in a way that made my skin crawl. Its eyes, empty black holes, seemed to pierce straight through me. And for the first time, I felt something like curiosity. I walked slowly, deliberately, toward the edge of the pond, keeping my eyes on it. The other figures didn't move. They simply watched. My heart pounded, but I didn't run. I didn't scream. Step by step, I walked through the forest, unafraid, asserting my presence. Hours, maybe minutes later, I don't know, I found the path again. The normal trail, clear and maintained, just as if the unmarked sections I had walked through had never existed. The sunlight was fading behind the ridges, and I stumbled to my car, trembling, my hands and legs scratched from branches. I didn't stop driving until I was miles from the park, certain I would never return. I told no one about the pond, the faces, the figures. Most people would have called me insane. Maybe I was, but I survived, and I realized something that changed everything I thought I knew about the forest. It didn't want to kill me. It wanted to test me, to see if I could endure. I spent the next few nights in my apartment replaying the experience in my mind. The pond, the faces, the figures, all of it haunted my thoughts. But I no longer felt fear. I felt connected. And that's when I noticed it. In my apartment, the air sometimes shifts as if the forest has moved in. Shadows stretch in impossible ways. And every so often, when I catch my reflection in a mirror, I see them. Just for a second. Pale, watching, waiting. Not to harm me, at least not yet, but to remind me that I belong in some way to the forest now. The national parks are not just protected land. They are alive. They remember. They wait. And sometimes, when you stray too far from the path, they notice you. I survived, but the forest never truly lets anyone go. I thought I knew the mountains. I've hiked alone for years, sleeping in the wilderness under stars, following maps, reading the terrain. But nothing I'd ever done prepared me for what happened last fall in Shenandoah National Park. I arrived just after sunrise, parking at a small, mostly forgotten trailhead off Skyline Drive. The trail was narrow, winding through old oaks and maples, their leaves turning gold and red. The air smelled of wet earth and decaying leaves, the crisp scent of autumn. I loaded my pack, checked my gear, and started up the ridge. I was alone, and I liked it that way. The first few hours were uneventful, almost serene. Sunlight filtered through the trees, casting shifting patterns on the forest floor. Birds called occasionally, and I breathed deep, feeling the familiar thrill of being somewhere almost no one went. Around noon, I reached a split in the trail. One path continued along the ridge, marked and familiar. The other was barely visible, descending steeply into a dense thicket that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. The trailhead sign warned, in small print, unmaintained path. Hike at your own risk. But I'd hiked worse. I took the descent, telling myself it would give me a shortcut to a waterfall I'd read about in an old hiking guide. The trail deteriorated quickly. Roots and rocks jutted from the ground, and the forest grew darker, almost oppressive. The wind died. The usual sounds, birds, insects, rustling leaves, vanished entirely. It was the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums and makes you feel like your own heartbeat is too loud. And I saw the footprints. They were human, but not human. Long, narrow, deep in the soft soil. Barefoot, leading toward the valley below, and none leading away. My stomach turned. I wanted to turn back, but the trail behind me had disappeared, swallowed by overgrown brush and fallen trees. I pressed on. Eventually, I stumbled into a clearing. In the center was a small pond, black as ink, perfectly still. I knelt to drink, and that's when I noticed the reflection. At first, it was me, but then, slowly, I realized it wasn't. My face stared back pale and gaunt, eyes hollow, lips curved into a grin I hadn't made. Behind it, shadows shifted, shapes that moved without sound. I backed away. My heart pounded. The forest around me seemed to breathe, stretching and bending in ways it shouldn't. And then I heard it, a whisper, soft, almost hesitant, but unmistakably human. Turn back. I spun, but no one was there. The shadows between the trees remained motionless, yet I knew they were watching. I ran. The forest twisted around me. The trail I thought I was following doubled back on itself. Every time I turned, the pond appeared again, closer than before, black and still, the reflection smiling. Figures emerged from the edge of my vision, tall and thin, movements jerky, unnatural. Their skin was pale, reflective as if wet. Their eyes empty holes, staring. I stumbled into another clearing. This one had what looked like a ruined cabin, half sunk in a moss and ivy. I approached cautiously. The door hung crooked. Inside, dust and rot reeked in the dim light, and on the walls were hundreds of photographs. People alone in the forest, smiling, posing, but every pair of eyes had been scratched out. Some faces were warped, frozen in silent terror. I gagged. I stumbled backward, almost tripping over the threshold. That's when I heard a voice, low and hollow, like it was coming from inside my own head. You shouldn't have come here. I ran blindly, back into the forest. Every tree seemed to lean toward me. Every root tried to snag me. I fell, scraping my hands and knees. When I looked up, the pond was there again, reflecting the pale moonlight, though the sun hadn't set. At its edge stood the tallest figure, head tilted unnaturally, long fingers brushing the water. It didn't move toward me. It didn't need to. Its presence was enough. I wanted to scream, but my voice refused. My mind raced. Then I remembered something my grandfather once told me. Fear gives life to what hunts you. The more afraid you are, the faster it catches you. I forced myself to stop, to breathe, to face it. I see you, I said. I'm here, and I will not run. The figure paused. The others froze. The water stilled. For the first time, the air felt still, not oppressive. It tilted its head, as if studying me, curious, not hostile. I walked slowly, deliberately, through the clearing. Step by step, I made my way around the pond, toward the trees where the light of the main trail shimmered. The figures did not follow. They watched. The forest exhaled. When I finally emerged onto the maintained trail, the sun had dipped low behind the mountains. I didn't look back. I walked steadily to my car, exhausted, bloodied, and shaken. I drove out of the park without stopping, heart still hammering. Weeks later, I realized the truth. The forest didn't want to kill me. It had tested me. It had wanted to see if I would cower, if I would flee, if I would panic. And I hadn't. That gave me passage, a kind of unspoken truce. I never returned to Shenandoah. I don't hike alone anymore. But sometimes when I walk in other forests, in other parks, I see shadows at the edge of my vision, shapes in the periphery. I catch glimpses of faces and reflections that shouldn't be there. And I know the forest is alive, watching, waiting. I survived that test, but I carry it with me now. The forest never forgets. And if I ever stray off the path again, it will remember me, and it will come for me. Because some wildernesses aren't just wild. They are patient, they are old, they are aware, and they do not forgive.
Drop a comment and let me know which story scared you most.